Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to continue our discussion today looking at the science of biology, the study of life. Let's take a look at some unifying themes in biology. Okay, evolution. Evolution is the core theme of biology. Obviously, life is distinguished by its unity and its diversity. We've talked now in great detail about the diversity of life, the different types of organisms that exist, the differences in their complexity, their makeup, and so forth. And so the scientific explanation for this unity and diversity is due to evolution, the process of change that has transformed life on Earth from its earliest forms to the vast array of organisms living today. So evolution sits as a major theme of biology, okay? Here we understand that each species on Earth today has a family history, right? A species represents one twig on a branching tree of life that extends back in time through ancestral species more and more remote. Okay, and so we're understanding that over time there has been evolution happening. Okay, this idea of evolutionary theory is useful in many different fields such as medicine, conservation, and agriculture. Okay, evolution is connected to our everyday lives, right? And so through this process of selective breeding of plants and animals, humans also act as agents of evolution, okay? As a result of artificial selection, we have our crops, livestock, pets, and so forth that bear very little resemblance to their wild ancestors. And so this is one of the sort of gifts and curses of advances in technology and knowledge, that we have sort of evolved away from a lot of our ancestors. All right, so we've got this selective breeding, we've got artificial selection as the sort of humans print on evolution. So yes, humans can act as agents of evolution. All right, and so we have a checkpoint question here. How? What do we mean when we say humans are agents of both artificial selection and natural selection? Explain that. What do you think this means? How? Explain how humans are agents of both artificial and natural selection. So we identified some properties of life in our last discussion. One of those was heredity. Life depends on this flow of information. So what information? We're talking about hereditary information that is being passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, so the processes of life, all that we've identified, right? That reproduction, maintaining homeostasis, metabolic activity, responding to stimuli, adaptation, all of those properties and processes that an organism exhibit depend on the transmission and use of information. And this information that we're referring to is DNA. DNA is responsible for heredity and for programming, so to speak, the activities of a cell by providing the blueprint for proteins. Okay, in a later conversation, we will take a deeper dive to explore this concept of the central dogma of biology that tells us that the information contained in our DNA is used as a blueprint or a template to create proteins, right? So we have these processes where we are able to go from the information that is in our DNA, and then we make this intermediate molecule that's known as RNA, and then we ultimately make our protein products. And so we're understanding that our proteins are the functional units of our cells, okay? So the information that's contained in our DNA in these nucleotide sequences are the blueprint for protein production. And so information from the external and internal environments includes stimuli, signals, pathways that regulate body processes and genes and gene expression. All of this information is encoded in our DNA. So this image right here is a model of what this DNA molecule looks like. Okay. Structurally, DNA is referred to as a double helix, right? So we have these two strands of nucleotides that sort of wind around each other in this helical formation. Okay, we've got these units joining together in the middle, these nitrogenous bases, and we've got in our what we call a backbone of the DNA, the sugar group and this phosphate group. All right, so these nucleotides are held together, or the nucleotides are the building blocks of DNA, and these nitrogenous bases are being held together in the middle by hydrogen bonds that are going to hold these two linear strands of DNA together as it forms this helix. Okay, so we've got nitrogenous bases in the middle. There are 4 that we find in DNA: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Okay, these 4 bases are going to base pair in a manner that we call complementary base pairs. A is going to pair with T, and G is going to pair with C. Okay, this is what we see in nature. The normal base pairing rules are that A pairs with T, G pairs with C. And so these base pairings are going to be held together by hydrogen bonds. Okay, and so this is what this DNA structure looks like. It's a double helix. Jot that down. And so this information transfer, then again, we're taking the information that's contained in our DNA, right? Where we have informational units. This information in our DNA is organized into structural units or informational units that we call genes, right? These genes are going to code for proteins, okay? These proteins are ultimately going to be the functioning products for our cells, okay? And so DNA is transcribed into RNA, okay? And the RNA is later going to be decoded or translated into proteins, okay? These proteins become the functional units of our cells. And these protein expression profiles are responsible for how each cell has its specialized function. Okay, so I want you to be able to describe for me the flow of information in our DNA. DNA to RNA to protein, okay? This translation process is taking place in the cell, in the cytoplasm on ribosomes, okay? This RNA has to be translated into a final protein product, okay? And so each gene, okay, will be transcribed and translated into a functional protein product, okay? This is the idea of information transfer within a living system, okay? Another theme in biology that we really want you to understand is the relationship between structure and function. The relationship between structure and function can be observed at every level of life. Okay, at the molecular level, the structure of a protein correlates to its function. Okay, proteins start out as a linear sequence of amino acids. This structure is known as its primary structure. But this protein can arrange itself into various conformations. At the primary level, it's just a linear sequence of amino acids, but this structure can then move on into secondary and tertiary and quaternary structures. And so changes in these structures at the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary levels will now influence the functionality of this protein. Okay, so the structure of this protein then ultimately affects or influences or has an impact on its function. For example, the hemoglobin molecules transport oxygen in our blood. On the cellular level, the long excisions of nerve cells enable them to transmit impulses from your spinal cord to your toes. Okay, so checkpoint question. Look at the structure of your hand. We're talking about how structure and function are related. Look at the structure of your hand and explain how the structure of your hand supports the function. Look at the structure of your hand and explain how its structure supports the function. What's the function of your hand? Okay. Another theme that we want to think about is life's dependency on energy. Life depends on the transfer and transformation of energy and matter. Okay. All of life's processes that we've talked about up to this point requires an input of energy. So where does this energy come from? We want you to understand this concept that energy flows through an ecosystem in a one-directional flow. I want you to be able to describe for me the one-directional flow of energy through ecosystems. What is the source? The major source of energy for life on Earth is the sun. Okay, this energy that's in the sun is going to be converted into chemical energy by producers. Okay, this energy that's now harnessed in these producers are going to be passed on to consumers. So energy transfer is happening from producers over to consumers. Okay. And at the same time, there is a transfer or loss of energy as heat in this process. So we've got this one directional flow of energy from the sun down to producers over to consumers. You should be able to describe for me the one-way flow of energy through the ecosystem. How does this work? Producers are able to use sunlight energy in order to produce their own foods. And then these same producers here at this bottom level of our food chain become, or at the bottom of our energy pyramid, they become a source of food for the trophic levels above it. So we have producers, and then we have various levels of consumers as we move through this energy pyramid. Energy is being transferred, but this process is not very efficient. There is a loss of energy during this transfer. Some of it is lost as heat. So life depends on the transfer and transformation of both energy and matter. So we're saying that these ecosystems that we mentioned before, ecosystems can be characterized by the cycling of matter throughout these ecosystems. Okay, so the cycling can be from the atmosphere into the soil, through producers, consumers, and decomposers, and then making its way back into the environment. And so we just could create this cycle that continues to exist. This schematic here shows you this one directional flow of energy through ecosystems and the cycling of matter. All right. The major source of energy for life on Earth is the sunlight. Okay. This sunlight energy is utilized by producers, okay, in order to undergo photosynthetic activity, okay? These producers are then going to become a source of food for our consumers. And we're clear that there are different types of consumers. We've got primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. All right. Different types of consumers in the ecosystem. This transfer of energy from producers over to consumers are not going to happen without this loss of energy as heat. At the same time, there is cycling of matter throughout our ecosystem. Okay, so our theme tells us that life depends on this transfer and transformation of energy and matter. So describe then for me how photosynthesis transforms energy and matter. What happens during photosynthesis? How does this process transform energy and matter? Okay, we're going to stop here today. You do have some concept review questions that I think you should be able to answer now after having listened to part 1 and part 2 of this talk. Your first question asks you to describe 7 properties that are common to all life forms. We've talked about those. Compare the 3 domains of life. This is where we now start to classify organisms. All right. Describe the levels of biological organization from molecules to biosphere, noting the interrelationships between each level. Define science and distinguish between a hypothesis and a scientific theory. You should be able to describe the structure of a controlled experiment. What are the components that we need in order to set up a controlled experiment? Number 7, explain how hypotheses can be used to test observational data. 8, describe the relationship between science and technology. Number 9, describe the process and products of natural selection. And lastly, explain how evolution impacts the lives of all humans. Thank you.